As expected, news has emerged this morning that Newcastle United have missed out on striker Benjamin Sesko. He's chosen to join Manchester United, who still need to match Newcastle's bid to Leipzig, but that is now looking like a formality. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to that, talking about what's next, and answering a lot of your questions on the current situation. It's NUFC Transfer Daily, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well on the video. It really does help. So as mentioned in the intro, Newcastle United have missed out on Benjamin Sesko. Not officially yet, but he has given his indication that he wants to join Manchester United, which is not really a shock. We've discussed it so many times on these videos. If he wanted to join Newcastle, he could have done it 2 weeks ago, and the fact that he didn't, and he was waiting for Manchester United to make a bid, by the sounds of it, the fact that that's happened now, it's just meant that Newcastle have missed out on another target, and that is a disappointing thing. Obviously, it means that Alexander Isak is unlikely to leave at this stage because Newcastle wouldn't sanction a move. It's not just about getting two strikers in, it's about getting adequate replacements for Isak as well. And as I've said so many times, Sesko is where Isak was 3 years ago. It makes sense. He's not on the same level by any stretch at the moment, but the hope is that he would go that far. That's why Newcastle were chasing him. Any other striker, Ollie Watkins, Johan Vissa, Gonzalo Ramos was mentioned yesterday, it would just be not really of the right quality, and they're sort of more in line with being Wilson replacements. So it's not about replacing Isak with a body, because that's doable. It's about replacing Isak with the right player and somebody who could follow in his footsteps. You're not going to sign a player of the same level because there aren't any available on the market, certainly not in Newcastle United's price range, but the aim was to be the club that could give Sesko the same platform to succeed. And I think I understand the reasons why he's chosen to join Manchester United, because of the history and because of the idea of it, but really the evidence is there to really say that Newcastle's the better option because of what's happened to Isak, because of what's happened to Rasmus Højlund, who was effectively Manchester United's last attempt at trying to do what Newcastle have done with Isak. Højlund's a great talent. He's become reduced to a meme over the last few years, which is really, really harsh. He came in for a price that was above his value for what he'd done, and he's struggled to live up to that under the pressure and the microscope of Manchester United. I think Benjamin Sesko would have developed better at Newcastle, but he's chosen to go to Manchester United and hopefully, in his mind, be better than Rasmus Højlund has been. So we'll see if that progresses and how that plays out. But to me, it's a bad choice from Sesko in a footballing sense, but he's made it now. And what did Newcastle do to move on? They have to keep Alexander Isak, because it isn't about bodies. It's not about signing two strikers. It's about signing two strikers who are good enough. And if you weren't going to get, or if Sesko didn't want to join Newcastle, what's the benefit of signing him over keeping an unhappy striker at Newcastle? And I've spoken so many times about how he can be reintegrated, how it's not as disastrous as it has been reported in the media, how it's not as desperate, how it's not as far along with Liverpool. Liverpool are probably unlikely to bid at this stage. They may well do, but what they've said is that they don't want to look at bidding for somebody who there isn't a realistic opportunity to get. And suddenly now Newcastle are in a corner where they can't afford to sell Isak, and they've said all along that they needed to get a replacement and the money needed to be there. Neither have been the case. Newcastle value him at 150 million. The last bid was 110. Are Liverpool going to bid 150 million? And without a replacement, is it worth selling him for that? Given that the reality of what would happen with so little time left in the window, there's no real opportunity to bounce back. So I asked for a few of your questions on this, and a lot of them came back. I got, I think, about 15 or 16 questions to get through in today's video, so that's what I'm going to be doing for most of the airtime today. But yeah, just quickly, I think Newcastle will not sell Alexander Isak now, and they can't. And there's a couple of questions on that, but we will get straight into it now. So I got some from X and some from Blue Sky. It was only an hour ago that I put this out, so that's why you guys in the comment section didn't get an opportunity to ask me anything, because it was I thought I'd get 3 or 4 questions that could go at the end, but it's turned into a full Q&A, which is fantastic and really shows how engaged the viewers and everybody is. So I'm really pleased with that. David Rees: how likely is it that we will see Anthony Elanga, Alexander Isak and Anthony Gordon playing together in September? And I think at the moment it's very likely. I don't know if that'll be the case next week. We don't know what Liverpool will do and if they'll come back in with the bid. But from what they've said all summer, there's really no reason for them to bid now, because I know they've sold Darwin Núñez, or they're selling Darwin Núñez to Al Hilal, and they've got money. I don't think that Newcastle are in a position to sell. I think if this deal was done in July, and so many times where this deal could have been done, the Ekitike whole scenario with that was when it really needed to be done ultimately, as it's transpired. I think likelihood is now that Alexander Isak stays, because it's not just, as I said earlier, it's not just about bodies, it's about quality, and there aren't any strikers out there. Tomorrow's video is going to be a look at the state of the striker market and seeing if there are any real genuine opportunities to replace Isak with a quality option. But at the moment, I think likelihood of seeing Isak play up front with Gordon and Elanga is quite strong, I would say, at this moment. Alex Wilson has asked, are the clubs seriously considering spending money on Jackson? I, for one, hope not. They have had Jackson on their list, I think, but he is not one that they're currently looking at, because the price that Chelsea have asked for, I think £80 million or 80 million euros, I can't remember, but it's a hell of a lot of money for a player of Jackson's profile, and that I think he's a good striker. I think he would come in and do a good job for Newcastle, but at the price that Chelsea are after, no, probably not. And given that they want Johan Visser, who will likely go to the AFCON in the winter, the fact that they would also have that situation with Jackson is probably something that's worth considering as well. So I don't think Nicholas Jackson will be coming in to join Newcastle this summer. Ted, how many goals will a front three of Gordon, Calvert-Lewin and Elanga score this season? So that, again, there were a couple of tongue-in-cheek ones which I appreciate, but I will answer them. Calvert-Lewin is a player that Newcastle have looked at and have on their list as a potential option as a Wilson replacement, and I think there was a point in the summer where I actually probably would have felt okay. Now I think it really wouldn't now, because they are looking at a really serious, sort of decent upgrade for Wilson, and to challenge Isak next season, as it looks like it will be Isak. I think that's a big thing, because it's not just about bodies, and Calvert-Lewin's actually, his injury record's improved considerably over the last couple of years, but his goal scoring record hasn't. Isak, there was a point last season, lots of talk about Isak sort of maybe slightly down in tools last season, not starting particularly well, not ending particularly well. I think it was a huge reason to do that was fatigue. He was playing games when he probably shouldn't have been, and also he wasn't being challenged. Wilson wasn't giving him any real threat to his place. He wasn't pushing him hard enough, and I think that's what Newcastle need out of a second striker this summer, whether it's Visser, whether it's Watkins, whoever it is. And is Calvert-Lewin really the answer to that? Personally, I don't think so. Next is Sanjeev Rehan, who's asked, do you think Newcastle dodged a bullet with Sesko? He's unproven and needs coaching. I'm sure Eddie Howe would have improved him, but no guarantees. And this is the crux of the matter, really. I think the reason why Newcastle wanted Sesko is because he reminded them a lot of Isak 3 years ago. He's very much in the same position, similar sort of level of expectation of where he could end up, and also what he's done. Not the same type of player, but that ability to grow is there, and I think that's what enticed Newcastle to him. In of the available options, I think it's right that they went for him. So dodged a bullet's quite strong, but the reality of the situation is that it's very difficult for them to get a striker on the same level of Isak. So you would have to go for somebody who's a risk, because all of the options, as I've found this summer, that they've wanted of sure things and guarantees in inverted commas have cost a lot and gone elsewhere. So they were left in a situation where they kind of have to take a risk on a player, and Sesko felt like the right option, and I do understand why. So I think dodged a bullet is slightly too strong in my mind. Next is Steve Bird. Does selling Isak now show an indication of admitting defeat to the top six in PSR? I don't think they'll sell Isak. So unless something else pops up that they deem viable as a potential replacement, I also think crucially, again, I might be wrong on this, but I think crucially Alexander Isak would understand that. I think he understands how valuable he is to Newcastle. He knows that Newcastle have wanted to make him their best paid player ever for a long time, and last season he was very happy at the club. I know there's lots of talk about, these long-term things of him saying that it was going to be his last season. I think lots of those things have been pushed out by the agent. I don't think he was nearly as unhappy as he purported to be in the last, or has purported to be in the last few weeks, or his camp has purported that he was in the last few weeks. So, yeah, I don't think they'll sell Isak, but if they did sell Isak, it would be a real act of self-sabotage because there's no replacement. So you are going in, and again, it's not just selling Isak, it's the timing of it just before the season starts. He would come back with Liverpool at the end of the month as well. There would all be that circus, and we know how much a crisis at Newcastle can affect everything, and there was one last summer and it involved Isak. He wasn't very happy at the start of last season and he got going again. So the fact that all of that's been through, Newcastle have been through that, and Eddie Howe's got him round before, I think means that he will do that again. But to answer the question, if they sold him, would it be a admittance of defeat? It would certainly put them in a very, very weak position and strengthen a direct top six rival, if you like. I know Liverpool are on a different level to Newcastle at the moment, but yeah, I do understand the point of the question. Next is Harry Symeou, who is an Arsenal fan and a podcaster, and actually a huge reason why this channel is framed the way it is and has done as well as it has. I've taken a lot from Harry's Chronicles of a Gooner. I've guested on that podcast quite a lot, and he's a really, really great guy. So I know he's an Arsenal podcaster. It might not be of interest to my viewers, but if you do check him out, you'd really get a lot out of him because he's a very, very good podcaster and very knowledgeable guy as well. He's asked, as a Newcastle fan, why do you think Newcastle are missing out on top targets? And my answer to that is, as I say, it's not different to before. As I've said this on previous shows, it's not different to anything before. It's not like this summer's been a humbling experience compared to previous ones. I know it's framed that way, but Newcastle have never gone against a big club and beaten them to a signing. So the players that they've signed have either been from relegated clubs or need to be developed to reach a level. You think of Lewis Hall, Teal Livramento, Nick Pope, Harvey Barnes, or if they've signed a top player from Europe, they've been looked at by other clubs but haven't been bid for other clubs. Like Arsenal wanted Bruno Guimaraes and Alexander Isak before Newcastle moved, but by the time Newcastle did move, they'd moved on and hadn't made their offers. So that's why Newcastle were able to sign those players, and that's why they're going for the same players that those clubs are bidding for, and they've been beaten to the punch by history and wages that they can't really compete with, whether we like it or not. They're not at that level, and that's been quite a difficult thing. I've railed against it all summer. I think Newcastle should have had a different approach, but it's not that they've failed in ways that they've previously succeeded. They've just failed in ways that, and having chosen to go down this route. And I think it is difficult that they've made that choice, but unfortunately that's how it's been. And moving on to Blue Sky, we've got Blood, who asks, who is handling transfer negotiations? Negotiations have been mainly handled by Steve Nixon, Eddie Howe a little bit, but also mainly I think Jamie Rubin's taken the sort of more senior role from the ownership side on the negotiations. So he was heavily involved with the Anthony Elanga thing, for example, because he had quite a decent relationship with Marinakis, the Forest owner, so that was what swung that by the sounds of it. And also he actually held talks with Benjamin Sesko this weekend, and that they went, by all accounts, went positive. Newcastle were confident that they had a decent deal on the table. And to go back to Harry's question, likes of Sesko, João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike all held positive talks with Newcastle this summer. It was just that when an option that they viewed as better came along, they went elsewhere. So Jamie Rubin's been the main ownership brain behind all the negotiations alongside Nixon and the two Howes. Gedge's Plectrum on Blue Sky has said, who is responsible for creating and then signing off the list of targets this summer? So that was in response to the last question. It was a reply on the same thread, and the answer to that, I think, it's been drawn up by a lot of different people. Paul Mitchell was involved in that, but I think it was mainly driven by Eddie Howe. What we've seen in the last year is a real change of tack in terms of Newcastle's approach to Eddie Howe, how they viewed him. He wasn't involved in the appointment of Mitchell last summer, which was quite symbolic. This season, though, he's been given the keys to the kingdom effectively because he's won the trophy and got them in the Champions League, and a lot of those players domestic-based, guarantees. That's a lot of Howe hallmarks. So that's, I think, it's not just Eddie Howe by himself by any means, but a lot of those players have been mainly viewed as Eddie Howe sort of really ready signings. I think that is very, very telling. Jim Campbell, what's the point of next season? Project's still a thing. Will Eddie walk? And this is why I think Eddie won't walk, because, as I say, like, as much as it's difficult and as much as it's a problem that they haven't signed players, and there is sort of questions upstairs with the CEO and the director of football and the sporting director and all those things. Eddie Howe has been heavily involved in these decisions this summer. It's not like last summer where he was a little bit put out by the current the dynamic, the fact that Eels didn't hire Mitchell with his blessing or anything like that. He's been heavily involved in everything from Ross Wilson, the sporting director, is about to come in. He's been involved in that discussions around that. So, and then obviously, as I mentioned in the previous thing, the targets as well have been very much geared to him. Anthony Elanga coming in was really an Eddie Howe signing. So I don't think Eddie Howe will walk, and I certainly don't think that he's to blame for certain things, but he's been part of this as well. He's not on the periphery like he was last year, and yes, the lack of sporting director and CEO doesn't help, and that there are some huge questions about the project, as the question rightly points out. But will Eddie Howe walk? I don't think so, because he's been heavily involved in everything as it's been progressing all summer. The next question is from Juan, who says, all hope lost? Can Howe draw 120% out of the squad and overachieve again with less resources and more games? What's the Cellar Cup atmosphere going to be like? So I won't be at the Cellar Cup, first of all, so I won't be able to answer that question, but I do think it'll be quite interesting to see what happens, especially if Alexander Isak is in one of the squads for either the Espanyol game or more likely the Atletico Madrid game on the Saturday. I think, can Eddie Howe get 120% out of the squad? Of course he can, because that's what he's done before, but it does feel like last season was a bit of a miracle, and he pulled a lot of stuff out of the bag, and it came from a good, strong couple of months. Really, it came from December to March. Newcastle were very, very difficult to beat, and they went on good runs and scored a lot of goals and all those sorts of things. So yeah, a really good season, but it was built on sand in so many ways, and this season really feels similarly. And because Chelsea and Manchester United and Liverpool, Arsenal and Man City and all these other clubs have improved, it feels like it's going to be even more unforgiving. Then you throw the Champions League into it as well. It's going to be very tough to see Newcastle really progressing in a similar way as things stand. If they get 3 or 4 new players in, I think 3 players would probably be a good end to the window. If they keep Isak, and it depends on who they are, they can have a good season, but they do need those 3 players to really continue in the vein that they've been going on from last season. James has asked, have NUFC reached a correction point of sorts, as in, has our on-field competitiveness now outstripped our commercial/wage/appeal competitiveness to the point where we're now going to hit the ceiling in terms of league and cup progression? I think so. Even if we'd operated this window, there is a sort of element of that. I think basically what that question, which is very well put, is asking is, have Newcastle sort of reached the point where they are at their limit in terms of the PSR situation and their revenue and what they're trying to achieve? And I think there is an element of that, because really they've been, the reason why they've, as I said earlier, the reason why they've been humbled in the race to sign these players like João Pedro and all that is because they're going up against clubs that it's easier to paint the picture that they'll win trophies. Even Manchester United, you take Benjamin Sesko as the reason why we're sitting down today. Even Manchester United, history suggests that they will be back at some stage, and that's what Benjamin Sesko is banking on with Ruben Amorim at the helm, that he can help Manchester United regain themselves. Newcastle have found themselves in a situation where they've done really well to put themselves at the table, but they're not permanent fixtures yet, and because of the revenue streams, because they're still so far behind the top 6, they're 7th in that table, but they're still so far behind the top 6 that bridge is so clearly there. So I do understand the point of the question, and I think it is very difficult, and this is why Newcastle had to be a bit more creative, as I've said, this summer. There's so many players, all the deals that they've done, all the types of deals that they've done in previous windows, the likes of the Livramentos or even the Tonalis and the Isaks, they were out there for Newcastle this summer, but they chose against them. They wanted to go for players who are ready to make that move to a destination club, and Newcastle aren't a destination club at the moment. So yeah, I do agree with the point of the question. Elron Fantana has asked, why did Newcastle persist trying to sign strikers from limited pool rather than building momentum by filling in clear gaps elsewhere in the squad like midfield and defence? Well, I think that strikers they're really concerned about the striker situation, even with Isak staying, because they need a backup. As I mentioned earlier, Wilson really didn't create any competition other than just being a body, and that's what's really taken precedence. The lack of staff has not helped in this thing of going and doing multiple deals at the same time. They still want a centre back, they still want a midfielder. Midfielder, I'm less convinced that they'll actually get. I'd hope to be proven wrong on that. Defence will be improved later in the window, but I think that I've said this before about Mark Gahey and other players. There are easy wins to have while this is going on. Gahey's a deal you could at least check out and see if that was possible and get done easily, because the price is set and everything. So that I agree with that whole thing. I think Newcastle are getting a little bit. It feels like Newcastle are getting bogged down in the sort of negativity of self-fulfilling prophecies. They're going for players that are going to be difficult to sign, and then there's nothing to really counteract that narrative, which is creating this sort of negative storm among the fan base. I think that is a very fair question. Ant Allen says, aside from Visser, what's the striker plan if Sesko doesn't sign? New target or Isak stays put? As I said, Isak will stay put, but they also do need another striker, so Visser is on the list. Watkins is liked. Gonzalo Ramos would be, in terms of price range, more of an Isak replacement. As I say, I'll do a video tomorrow probably looking at what the reality is if they are trying to replace Isak, because I think they'll try and still look towards that if they can, but there aren't a vast amount of options. There are plenty of options out there for Wilson replacements. I mean, the guy who's just going to Villa, Evan Gassond, who we spoke about on this channel, is a really great example of somebody who would have slotted in perfectly for the Wilson replacement. He's powerful, he's young, he's got good goals and assists in the league, and last season 20 in 33 games. Play across the front, he's versatile. 35 million euros seems like a great deal for Villa, and that's the sort of thing that Newcastle should have been looking at. So there are plenty of options out there for those sorts of players, but it's the Isak replacement that's really difficult to find, I think. Toon Wolf says, be interested in a discussion of the benefits of spending big on young project players versus bulking up the squad with some mid-career pros. Arguably, we could have brought in 3 players for the price of 1 Sesko. Obviously, we want quality, but we have a very small squad for a number of games we expect. And I think this is an interesting point as well, because Newcastle need a balance between signing top quality players, and Eddie Howe said every player that comes in needs to improve the squad, but then you're looking at the bench and you've seen Jamal Lascelles playing in pre-season, you've seen Joe Willock hasn't been good enough for a year really, and there's no pressure for his position. So I think that's where I would agree with that, and there's a balance needed, of course, but for me, I sort of said this with the Gonzalo Ramos thing. Gonzalo Ramos is if you can't get a really top quality replacement for Isak and you still want to replace Isak, the next thing you look at is trying to reinvigorate careers, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a 28-year-old who's sat on a fat wage somewhere. You can go and find 24-year-olds who are, maybe not getting. Look at Chelsea's squad, for example, or Arsenal have done this really well in the last couple of years. They've done it with Madueke this summer, but they do it with Havertz as well. I know they've got a lot of criticism for it, but signing players from Chelsea and then still being better than them in the league, that's what it's because they're in it. They're able to thrive. They're able to flourish. So I would suggest maybe looking at players who need a break at top clubs. Ramos is a good example as potential signings, because they're available, they're keen, they're willing, and as we're seeing with Sesko and we're seeing with Ekitike, going and trying to sign the next big thing isn't always the best thing to do. So I do understand that question completely. Pablo Blanco says, will Howe walk? The project is disintegrated before our eyes with a lack of urgency. So this earlier, I said I don't think Howe will walk. I think he's been part of that whole situation. But again, I do agree with the lack of urgency thing, and the lack of, why does it take so long to replace Darren Eales? Why has it taken so long to then replace Paul Mitchell in play. I mean, do you really want a sporting director before you hire your CEO? Both of those are apparently imminent, will be probably announced this month, with David Hopkinson and Ross Wilson coming in. But that's the sort of lack of urgency that doesn't help. But as I say, I think Howe has been very much more involved in the way things have gone this summer. He's shaped a lot of Newcastle's plans, rightly or wrongly. They've not really worked out, but I'm sure he's frustrated with that, but I don't think he's going to walk. I think he's here for the long term. He seems much happier this summer than he was last summer, because he's much more, as I say, in the middle of it. So, yeah, I don't see how walking at any point soon. Let me know what you think, though, in the comment section. Do you think that this one could change anything, with obviously Sesko not being there, and obviously now what happens with Isak? And the final question was from Ruddy Marvelous, which is, when will this pain end? Unfortunately, it feels like the pain may have to wait till September to end. But at the same time, Newcastle are still looking for signings. They'll still, I think, sign a striker to replace Wilson. I think Isak can be reintegrated. Isak will get his head down once September rolls around, and he's got the opportunity to play this season, score a lot of goals, and then go next year. I think Newcastle will have that more set in stone as it was originally planned. I think the whole summer this has caught them off guard, the Isak thing. It's caught everybody off guard, the way he's gone about it, and Liverpool have sort of not really helped in the way that they've not gone away. We'll see what Liverpool do in the next few days, but now it feels really difficult for Newcastle to be in a position to even entertain 150 million. So I think that strangely the Sesko situation can be set the summer a bit, because now it's all over. They know that Isak is not likely to go. They can build around that. They can go and find a centre back, and go and find a midfielder, and go and find a second striker. I think with that squad going in, with Ramsdale and Elanga on the squad already as well, I think that isn't the worst place to be. So although it feels difficult at the moment, it's far from the worst situation Newcastle have been in over recent years. I know it does feel like it at the moment, but yeah, I hope these questions have helped settle you down a little bit. It's been a tough few weeks, I know, and this is not the news that anybody really wanted to hear, but there is a silver lining that I think if Isak stays, he will get back into it. He's been back in the training ground this week. The noise has settled down a little bit in terms of him agitating. I think once he gets face to face with the squad, once he gets face to face with Howe, and he's given the situation, then he can get his head round it. I don't think anything, it might be wrong, hopefully I'm not, but I don't think anything will come from this if Newcastle do lay down the law to him and his agent. Let me know in the comment section what you think on any of the answers that I've given today, any of the thoughts on Sesko as well, and what happens next. Tomorrow's video, I will look, unless something breaks, my idea is to look at the market out there to see if there is any alternative replacement for Isak. So let me know any names that you want me to discuss. I know Nick Waltermard has been wanted by a couple of you guys, and a couple of other names as well. And I'll be back tomorrow. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.